Well, everyone, you might be surprised to see me up here, but I'm filling in for Joyce Elferdink today. She is out for this session, but she'll be back next session to do the introduction. And you might recognize a different face than you might have expected to see when you walked in today. But I am happy to report, or sad at the same time, that our original presenter, John Birnbaum, has had some surgery that has kept him from presenting this course of the next 4 weeks. Have not heard an update yet, but hopefully things are going well for him and his family. We wish him a quick and healthy recovery. But that being said, we're able to bring in another great expert on the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Scott Lingenfelter from Grand Valley State University, who ironically was set up to present this course, or one very similar to it, last semester. And he had some surgery that kept him away from presenting. And John stepped in for him. So it's kind of a full circle here. So in long story short is stay away from these two gentlemen because they're bad luck. But this gives us a really a unique opportunity to adjust this class and keep it the most relevant we can for you. So Scott's going to be here to present this week and next week. The third week of this course, we have a great opportunity to zoom in with student filmmakers and journalists from Ukraine. So week 3, when you are here, that'll be October 25th, we'll have a number of students joining us live via Zoom from Ukraine to talk to us about their work as future journalists and their work as student filmmakers right now challenging the authority of Putin's government. Okay, so that'll be a wonderful experience for all of you to participate in. In our 4th week, we're still finalizing our details, but we might pivot just slightly and bring you a presentation on the now ongoing conflict in the Gaza Strip. So please be assured that we are so thankful that all of you are willing to join us for these 4 weeks. We apologize for the change in the original programming, but hopefully this will be a great experience for you nonetheless. So let me just get to the brief description here of Scott in case you are not familiar with him. Scott Lingenfelter is a senior lecturer at Grand Valley State University, where he teaches courses in modern world and Russian history. He holds a PhD in modern Russian history from the University of Illinois at Chicago. Dr. Lingenfelter is a recipient of the Kennan Institute Title VIII Short-Term Research Fellowship to study the role of the Robert Shaw Chorale and the Cultural Diplomacy Program of the United States State Department in the early 1960s. Did I get that all out correctly?
You did.
Okay, that's a mouthful. Please welcome Scott, Dr. Lingenfelter. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ian. Thanks so much for helping get set up and welcoming me, making me feel at home. This is my first time here, so I appreciate the chance to be with everyone. Good to see you. And I do mean see you because the surgery that I had, what was it, back in, seems like years ago, but it was in February, was retina surgery. I had a detached retina the last day of classes. You know what that's all about. So my left eye is a little wonky. It's not what it was, but I've got some vision still. So that's good news. But that was the reason for that. So I missed being with you, and I'm glad to be back here. John, you've met with John Birnbaum, my senior colleague. We met 30 years ago at Wheaton College. He came through, I was working there at the time, in an institute for East-West Christian Studies just after I finished my master's at Wheaton. And he was coming through. He was part of the Christian College Coalition at that point, was just setting up or attempting to set up a Christian university in Moscow. So he had a beard and no gray hair. And now I've got gray hair, and 30 years later, and we've had quite a both of us have had an interesting career, I think. John's story is much more dramatic and much more personal in terms of his involvement in this part of the world. I've been there 4 times, and I have friends in this part of the world, but his working relationship with students and faculty is much closer. So he's going to be a hard act to follow. But I look forward to being with you and working through some of these things because we're at a critical time, aren't we? I mean, this is as if one major war wasn't enough. Now we have 2, and then all the divisions that we've got around us: divided country, divided political parties, divisions within political parties, within churches and families. So it's a difficult time. And, you know, our story really about Ukraine is important enough in itself. It's affecting millions of people. It's a regional conflict that could spread and become a much bigger deal for everyone to handle, to deal with. But there are some things that run deeper, even beyond this conflict, that I think we'll be able to get into. Some issues and some currents and some problems that run even deeper than our immediate focus. And I want to be able to talk about those things. Partly because I talk about them with college-age students, and they have their Gen Z perspective, and that's important. But I'd like to learn and hear what you've got to say about kind of where we're at, the state of things these days, the state of play in the U.S. and in Europe and globally, the things that affect us as citizens, as voters, as Christians, as residents in West Michigan in different ways. And I'm so glad to hear that there's going to be a direct link with Ukraine. That's the voice we need to hear. John and I are happy to do this, but our perspective is basically one-sided. We try to be as objective as possible, but to have those other voices is really, really valuable. So I'll see if I can tap into the Zoom those days. In any case, it's great to be with you. My wife and I live in Grand Rapids. We moved from the Chicago area about 8 years ago. I'm an Okie originally. I made my way to Chicago for grad school, met my wife Sarah, and we started our careers and life there. She's a massage therapist and does post-operative therapy as well as deep tissue and all the best kinds of massage. She's the best around. I'm happy to be her marketing director, but in any case, in Cascade, and then I teach at both Grand Valley and Western. So 3 days a week I'm at Grand Valley, and 2 days a week I'm at Western down in Kalamazoo. So this looks good. This bench looks good up here. I might make use of it here in a few minutes. So what I think I would like to do is just take a quick look at where we're going to be going over a couple of weeks, and then get started with some background, and then as soon as possible, get to some discussion points and discussion questions. One of the things that we will try to discuss is an article that I believe you might have access to, if not this week, next week. An article that was probably distributed by Tim Judah on Ukraine's new normal. We'll likely get to that next time. We'll see how things go, but likely next time. And the reason I want to include that is that when we think about an update in the future, there's the geopolitics that we'll be talking about, and the trends that we're trying to follow from the public reporting and things that aren't quite so public. So the sort of the mainline 30,000 feet geopolitics, but the future also includes relationships. And that article does a great job of taking us on the ground to try to tap into what's the family experience, the couple's experience, the kids' experience of this war, of this conflict. And what it means in the region. So I think we need both. I think to have a balance, we need both the geopolitics and the personal relational side. So that's the reason that that's included. There's no test, there's no exam, there's no assignment. So that should be good news for both of us. Because I have 8 classes, and so to grade yet other assignments could I would. I think it's a good suggestion. That's John. I'll keep that in mind. All right. So some of these images try to combine the key players, of course, along the way. Here are 3 of them in the mix here: Russia, Ukraine, and the future of Europe. Now, I don't try to make predictions, and part of that I learned that from my senior colleagues like John. He says, I'm not a prophet in that way, and don't try to make predictions. But what we'll try to do is to take a look at the things we see around us and see if those are indicators of what what we might be looking at or might be facing. Okay. So this is our agenda. I'd like to take a look first at 3 myths that we can knock down right away that kind of get us into our topic. A background section on some history on how we got to this point. Okay. And 4 or 5 aspects that I think help us explain that. Where do we stand at this point, at this moment here in October, this lovely day, actually, lovely fall day here in early October 2023. Things to watch, things to keep in mind. And this is what's changing. So, this week I have this list. Next week, as fast as things are moving, there may be a slightly different list. And then I'd like to highlight some additional reading that you might be interested in, and then some final discussion points. A couple of books right away before we get too much further and I forget. A very easy kind of a nice, easy to read book on Ukraine. What everyone needs to know is by an author named Yekelchuk, Yekelchyk. I'll leave it up here in case you want to take a look at it. It's a series of questions and answers. So it's not dry. It's not a super deep dive into Ukraine's past. That may be your interest, but this is a nice, quick way to answer some of the most basic questions that we all of us have. It's by a historian of Ukrainian descent, teaches in Canada, and I recommend it. I use it in class. It's great to use. The other is on Russia itself by a well-known Russian historian, Orlando Figes, Figes, and simply called The Story of Russia. This is his latest book to summarize Russia's story and the countries of Eastern Europe, the region that we're focused on, through the lens of this current conflict. So you get a nice sense of where we're at now in historical perspective. It's in paperback. It's relatively inexpensive. So again, that's it's easy to get to, and I'll be referring to it. I think I haven't talked with Ian about this, but I thought that given our time, we'd meet for maybe 40 minutes, take a break for 5-10 minutes, and then have another 35-40-minute session if that's good with everyone. I think that will help us break this up in good places. Okay, so our agenda, by the way, it's not a lecture. The slides are simply a way for us to focus and have a common focus for reflection and discussion. So if you have a question along the way, please don't hesitate to stop me as I go through this. Okay. Oh, yes.
I just have a comment. We have been fortunate enough to have this live Ukrainian youth
Yes,
who
right.
are in school there,
Uh-huh.
and they talked with us the session we had.
Oh,
So
okay.
we've already been.
You've already done this.
Oh,
Okay.
yes.
Well, you're way ahead
It's
of me.
wonderful.
So, okay. Well, good.
It was wonderful.
That's good. I think that's an essential element here. And because that's the kind of perspective that we actually need. I try to incorporate some of the Ukrainian perspective along the way in a short video. We'll get to that in a bit. But they are the future. So those are the ones we want to hear from. All right, let's debunk a few myths just to begin here, just to get us started and warmed up. First myth: Kiev was the beginning of Russia. I don't know how that rings to you. There is some truth to it. Culturally, Kiev was actually the cradle of Russian culture. Its religion, maybe the language, maybe other aspects, but it was not the beginning of the Russian state. That's a much later development. Kiev was founded in 10th century. The first mention we have of Moscow is about 1147. So they're separated by a lot of geography and a lot of chronology, a lot of time. And that can be confusing. It can also be used as a justification for the Kremlin that this is our first city. And so getting it back is simply, it makes sense. That is fact check false. That's not the case. So the cradle of Russian culture, but not the Russian state. A related myth, Ukraine has always been part of the Russian Empire. When the Russian Empire was formed, Ukraine was right in the mix. Fact check, false. That was not the case. We'll take a look at when that was incorporated. A quick way to summarize this, a portion of current Ukraine was added in the 1660s. So that much is true. It became an republic, an autonomous republic in the Soviet Union after 1922. And then after 1991, it is an independent nation with all the rights, responsibilities of an independent nation. Now, that's not Russia's view. That's not the Kremlin's view. And that's no surprise. But that is fact. What about the fact now that we're able to, in this forum, and this is not always the case in public meetings and discussions of this kind, we can think about the Christian communities in this part of the world. What about this? The Ukrainian Orthodox Christians are part of the Russian Orthodox Church. True or false? Some of them are, but increasing numbers, especially since the invasion, have left the Moscow Patriarchate, which is the Moscow's jurisdiction over Orthodox churches. A growing number are not. They have joined the autocephalous, the independent Ukrainian Orthodox church community. So that can't be used as a justification for any sort of an invasion, like the one that we saw 18 months ago or whatever it was. Okay, so just to kind of clear the deck on some things that often come up in conversation, family discussions, whatever, that we can clear right away. So how do we get to this point? Here's a complicated chart that we'll come back to. It's I think let's see, do the members have access to the slide set? Or okay, great. You can take a look at this. The reason I'll come back to it, it's a great way to think about the flow of events since about 2000, since the point at which Putin assumed control. And it shows the evolution of Russia's attitude to the West and the reasons for its aggression in its former Soviet territory. So right in the middle are the series of global events from like 1991 to 2018. Okay. And then the flow of marks and milestones on the top and the bottom are Russia's reactions to those global events. So this is one way of answering the question, how do we get to this point in a single chart? Okay. So we'll come back to this in a bit, but I want you to just to highlight that it's at a glance a nice way of looking at how we got to this point, as it's indicated the evolution of the Kremlin's foreign policy. Okay. You look in the upper left-hand corner, ISW. In a bit, when we take a look at where we stand at this point, I'll highlight this institute even more. But at this point, I want to mention that it's one of the best single sites for keeping up with what's happening on the ground, not only with the war in Ukraine, but now in Israel. It's the Institute for the Study of War, so ISW. And we'll go to that, maybe go to the website in a bit, just to highlight what is there. All right. Here are some reasons how we got to this point. And a number of these are historical. We'll start deep in the past, and then we'll come forward to the present. First, simply because we got to this point, because we're dealing with a perspective from the Kremlin that history is on the side of reincorporating Ukraine back into Russian territory. Putin looks at this territory. If we look at this map, we see Russian expansion. We would carve out the area for the Russian Federation. When Putin looks at this map, the Kremlin looks at this map, and again, I don't think this is a surprise, he sees historic Russia. He sees either the Soviet Union or the Russian Empire. Those two different perspectives result in a clash eventually. because as you know, after 1990, 1991, 14 of the 15 republics declared their independence. So that means they see their future in a very different way as Russia does. Russia still sees the Kremlin anyway. I have to be careful using Russia because let's be specific. The Kremlin views this territory, past or present, as its sphere of influence. So whatever the declarations of independence have been since 1991, whatever the independent foreign policies have been, Kremlin sees this as its sphere of influence. So what happens in Georgia or Estonia or Latvia or Ukraine, that's its business. And if they start to stray too much, it's their business to pull them back in. The arguments are historical. Putin himself in 2000 says from the very beginning, Russia was created as a super centralized state. That's practically laid down in its genetic code, its traditions, and the mentality of its people. So that's a clear indication of where he's coming from, his stance in this. It's not just imperial, it's anti-democratic, and that helps us understand where we're at. So when was part of Ukraine incorporated into Russia? Well, it was at this point in the 1660s. Poland at this point was known as the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and they fought a war against this budding Muscovite state to the east, what's here labeled the Tsardom of Russia, over a rebellion in what is now part of Ukraine, a Cossack rebellion against the Polish-Lithuanian landlords. And that rebel, whose name was Khmelnytsky, appealed to the Tsar of Russia, Alexei, to help, to fight on their side against the Poles. This happens. And the settlement that results is this. So what is called the left bank Ukraine, what to us looks like the right bank, if you're looking from the north, this is why there's the difference. That has historically been more Russian-speaking and Russian-leaning, Russian-held. On the so-called right bank, that has been more European-leaning and more diverse ethnically, linguistically, and all the rest. Okay, so that's why you've got, even today, a split in Ukraine between more Russian speakers, Russian-leaning residents, maybe in family background, maybe in politics, and those that are more European-leaning. It doesn't divide as neatly geographically as this map suggests, but this is the moment when we can say that part of what is now Ukraine actually formally becomes part of the Russian Empire. Okay. This is even more complicated, but it's worth taking a look at a couple of these maps because it shows the territorial evolution of modern Ukraine from 1654 until 1922. All of this, the point of this slide is simply to say this is complicated stuff. This is a complicated story. It's not so easy to say this is European, Ukrainian state or a strictly Russian state. It's complicated. It's mixed. I think the important thing for us at this point is just to look at the number of European countries that were interested in this territory: Poland, Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, that Turkic Muslim empire that crossed 3 continents, Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East for centuries. By about 1795, this area was split between 3 European powers completely, Russia being one of them. But the important thing is by 1922, there was a measure of autonomy, and this was done under Lenin, of all people. The Kremlin believes, Putin believes that Lenin made a big mistake here. And you might have read a little bit about this, that Lenin gave the Ukrainians the impression that they were an independent people. And he believes that was a big mistake, that was contrary to Russia's history. It was contrary to the essence of Eastern Slavic life. Well, the Ukrainians don't see it that way. as you can imagine. This was the moment when they had began to have, it was still in the Soviet orbit, but they began to have a different sense of their relationship with both Poland and Germany, for that matter, and the Soviet Union. All right. So all that to say that there's a reading of Russia's past that is imperial, that includes the region of Ukraine, that is part justification for the invasion. We don't see it as valid or legitimate, but that's from the Kremlin's point of view, that's one of the reasons for this. The 1990s was a very difficult time in Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union. It was a reorientation, a redefinition of its politics, its culture, its religion in some ways. It was extremely, it's called its time of troubles. The economy collapsed. It was a really, really difficult time. There was a lot of rethinking about what Russia should be. Who should it include? What is Russia? It was that basic. It was that fundamental. Could there be a Russia without Ukraine? Is Russia really Russia without those Western borderlands? What now is the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Ukraine, around the Black Sea? Is it possible? And there were a lot of different definitions. And one in 1998 was put forward by Solzhenitsyn, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who is famous as one of the 20th century's great Russian writers. I mean, you might be familiar. Have you read anyone? I'm sure. How many of you read works by Solzhenitsyn or are familiar with, okay, The Gulag, One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich? What's that? First Circle, right. The trilogies on the wars. And he argued in this essay that he, first of all, denounced the creation of a Ukrainian autonomous republic under Lenin. He called for the annexation of eastern and southern Ukraine. And he asserted that Russian territory should include the two Donetsk provinces and a southern belt of what is sometimes referred to as New Russia, which is Melitopol, Kherson, and Odessa, and Crimea. Now, does that sound familiar? Does that sound like, if we look at maps today, the invasion, does that resemble anything? It certainly does. And that was persuasive for a lot of policymakers. And one of them, because of his experience in the 1990s, and because of the way he was brought up in the KGB, and also because of his initial experiences with Western diplomats, was to agree with Solzhenitsyn. This became a very powerful way of defining Russia's future. In other words, it's to include these older traditional territories again, even if it meant coercive inclusion. Now, why would, outside of historical reasons, we go back to one of these maps, why would this be an attractive or seen as an indispensable part of Russia's future? What is it about this geography and this part of Europe that would be absolutely critical for the way Russia saw itself in its future? Okay, access to the Black Sea. What else? Which leads to the Mediterranean. Okay, the oil. Right. This is Russia's outlet. There are two outlets, of course, the Baltic and the Black Sea, and that axis tells you almost everything you need to know about Russian history. And not just Russian history, actually, in Eastern Europe as well. What's going on in the Baltic and what's going on in the Black Sea, including oil, including what else? What else is, right, food, the grain stores. It's the breadbasket of Europe. It's a huge country. So to feed Russia, when you think of Russian agriculture, the productivity, a lot of it was historically in Ukraine. under the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union. So there are a lot of reasons why, outside, in other words, of the sort of mythical connection between Slavic peoples or Ukraine being part of Russia's past, there are very real hard-nosed interests in keeping Ukraine. I about said that myself. Keeping Ukraine in the fold. Okay. So that was number one. Putin is, and the Kremlin believes that history is on his side. The other reason we got to this point is that he was unable to control Ukraine by peaceful means. And so he believed he was left with only coercion and forceful means. He tried to work with his preferred candidates like Viktor Yanukovych. He was ousted in the uprising, the Maidan uprising at the end of 2013 and 2014. Cyber attacks on presidential elections. More recently, about the time that Zelensky was elected president, he tried to meddle in other ways. There was a house arrest in Ukraine of some pro-Putin oligarchs, which upset the Kremlin. He tried some energy shutoffs, but Zelensky still wouldn't change policies and wouldn't warm up to Putin. And then there was an assassination attempt on one of Zelensky's close pals and mentors. And so he came to the conclusion that as much as we can understand what's going on behind the walls of the Kremlin, that these means simply weren't working. It was going to take something else to get to that point. The other is this question of NATO. And this is one that we might want to get into. Did NATO expand too far, too fast? Did it threaten Russia in some way? Or is this is Putin's problem? This is his issue. One thing is for sure, it has grown. From 1949 to 2022, it's gone from 12 to 31 members. And if you look at when the growth takes place, it's after 1999. So the Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, and then the Baltic states, and Slovakia, Slovenia, and so on and so forth, all the way to the present, Finland and Sweden. Okay. The two arguments, of course, expansion actually created the Russian drive to expand, or the other is that the expansion of NATO was because Russia had already demonstrated that it was going to expand, was already on a campaign of aggression. We can get into that. That's turned out to be quite a major debate. You might look at this and think, all right, that's the trend. Putin opposed NATO expansion, and the fact that it kept coming, he kept feeling like that it was coming closer and closer to Russia's borders, especially its historical borders. But I use the word offended, and I do that intentionally. Why do you think? I'm asking you to explain why I would use that word. I don't know if that's the best idea, but why do you think that a word like that might be appropriate, offended, rather than just he opposed it, he worked to stop it? Why offended, you think?
Is it an enemy or is it a bad guy?
Yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, sure. I'm sorry. Would it be because he thinks other countries that are in NATO would view him as a potential enemy, as a threat?
Yeah, that's right. It's thank you. Yes. Anyone else? It's yeah. It's personal, right? It's personal for him. Why doesn't the West get the fact that this is our territory? This is what happens here is our business. It's not their business. What's going on in Georgia or Estonia or Ukraine? Yes, they're independent, but that's, this is our history. This is our neighborhood. This is our backyard. No, that's one view of things, but this is why in other words, there's a personal dimension here that I think is important to remember. It's not just policy. It's not just every president of the Russian Federation would feel this way. Maybe in terms of policy, but this is deeply personal for him, and I think that's important. And this might be the moment when we actually see him talk about this. Let's see if this will.
Как сказал еще в первый.
Yeah. Just to make the case and to demonstrate this, in 2007, there was a security meeting in Munich. And, you know, at these meetings, you've got the world leaders speaking on security interests and what they believe is happening, and projections of how cooperation might work going forward. He shocked everyone with this speech. It may not seem so like it would rattle the diplomats and the powers that be that attended the meeting in Munich, but it was seen as very double-fisted and aggressive. Now, there are subtitles, but watch his body language as well. And what he's describing is this offense, personal offense, I think, at the expansion of NATO at Russia's expense. Okay. And it's, what, 3 minutes?
В дни разгоравшейся Второй мировой войны Франклин Рузвельт, где бы ни был нарушен мир, мир повсюду оказывается в безопасности и под угрозой. Эти слова продолжают сохранять актуальность и сегодня. Об этом, кстати, свидетельствует и тема нашей конференции, которая здесь вот написана: «Глобальные кризисы, глобальная ответственность». Убежден, мы подошли к тому рубежному моменту, когда должны серьезно задуматься над всей архитектурой глобальной безопасности. Разве мы должны безучастно и безвольно взирать на различные внутренние конфликты в отдельных странах, на действия авторитарных режимов, тиранов, на распространение оружия массового уничтожения? Конечно, это вопрос серьезный. Можем ли мы безучастно смотреть на то, что происходит? Я попробую ответить на ваш вопрос тоже. Конечно, мы не должны смотреть безучастно. Конечно, нет. Но есть ли у нас средства, чтобы противостоять этим угрозам? Конечно, есть. Достаточно вспомнить недавнюю историю. Ведь произошел же мирный переход к демократии в нашей стране. Ведь состоялась же мирная трансформация советского режима. Мирная трансформация. И какого режима? С каким количеством оружия, в том числе ядерного оружия? Почему же сейчас при каждом удобном случае нужно бомбить и стрелять? Неужели в условиях отсутствия угрозы взаимного уничтожения нам не хватает политической культуры, уважения к ценностям демократии и к праву? Потенциальная опасность дестабилизации международных отношений, связанная и с очевидным застоем в области разоружения. Россия выступает за возобновление диалога по этому важнейшему вопросу. Важно сохранить устойчивость международно-правовой разоруженческой базы. При этом обеспечить преемственность процесса сокращения ядерных вооружений. Не могу не упомянуть и о кризисном состоянии договора об обычных вооруженных силах в Европе. Страны НАТО открыто заявили, что не ратифицируют договор, включая положение о фланговых ограничениях, о размещении на флангах определенного количества вооруженных сил, до тех пор, пока Россия не выведет свои базы из Грузии и Молдавии. Из Грузии наши войска выводятся, причем даже в ускоренном порядке. Эти проблемы мы с нашими грузинскими коллегами решили, и это всем известно. В Молдавии остается группировка в 1500 военнослужащих, которые выполняют миротворческие функции и охраняют склады с боеприпасами, оставшиеся со времен СССР. Но что же происходит в это же самое время? А в это самое время в Болгарии и Румынии появляются так называемые легкие американские передовые базы по 5000 штыков в каждой. Получается, что НАТО выдвигает свои передовые силы к нашим государственным границам. А мы, строго выполняя договор, никак не реагируем на эти действия. Думаю, очевидно, процесс натовского расширения не имеет никакого отношения к модернизации самого Альянса или к обеспечению безопасности в Европе. Наоборот, это серьезно провоцирующий фактор, снижающий уровень взаимного доверия. И у нас есть справедливое право откровенно спросить, против кого это расширение.
Okay. So this is an angry fellow. I think that's, what he sees is they're coming for us. This is just a traditional way that the West comes at us. You can flip that and say the reason that that was expanded is because of Russia's its actions. It's just for another perspective on what it was like to deal with Putin over these years. What was it like from the point of view, let's say, of an American diplomat who had known him in the 1990s before he was anybody, and then all the way to this conference in 2007 when he makes a speech like this. One of the best, I think, is our current CIA director, William Burns, who has served as diplomat in a lot of places around the world. Very insightful commentator. And he has worked with him directly. He's worked with the Kremlin directly. And his comments, I think, are an important kind of counterpoint to this speech by Putin. And this is Burns, and again, just like maybe in 3 minutes or so. If I have this queued up properly, let's see. Thank you, Ian, for setting this up, by the by. Otherwise, this would be,
Let's go to 2007 or so, before the Munich speech, right in that time. How different is he? How different is that Vladimir Putin from the man who was handed the baton by Yeltsin back in '99?
Oh, I think there was a considerable evolution in Putin in some ways over that period of time, particularly since the Orange Revolution in Ukraine in 2004, which I think Putin saw as a direct threat to his own control in Russia, and the notion that, regime change and what he always saw to be Russia's sphere of influence was threatening to his interests. And so there had been a gradual buildup of frustration and anger on his part at what he saw to be, duplicitous behavior on the part of the West and the United States. He always gave us more credit than we deserve for careful conspiracies. But I think that was the lead up to the Munich speech, which was kind of a very pugnacious exclamation point on what was a kind of gradually accumulating set of frustrations and grievances on his part.
I go back and I search the archives for quotes about him from Angela Merkel, and they all say madman, lunatic, whatever. Was he that by then?
No,
if he's that at all.
No, Putin, I think is a very complicated personality. I think he lives in a world in which, the tough get to set the rules and the weak get taken advantage of. He's a cynic about people around him and sometimes about his own population as well. Control is what he attaches the most importance to. He's tactically very agile. He's, quite capable of playing rough and taking calculated risks. I don't think he's a grand strategist. And if he is, he hasn't been particularly successful in that, in the sense that he's still stuck with a one-dimensional economy, way too dependent on hydrocarbons. If you look at the consequences strategically of, his aggression against Ukraine, he's managed to convince, 42, 43 million Ukrainians that, that they need to sustain their independence and, ensure that they're not in any way dependent on Russia in making their political and economic choices. But tactically, he's very agile as well. But he's not a madman. Power does corrupt, and he's been in power in Russia a long time, so he's got his blind spots. But he's very carefully calculating about what he sees to be Russia's interests and how best to pursue them.
Let's talk about the Munich speech. Astonishing.
So I think we're at a nice breaking point, because up to this point, we've kind of given the Kremlin and Russia the privilege of speaking in perspective. A lot of these slides begin with Putin does this, or he thought this, or did this. Let's begin to look at things from the other side, from the Ukrainian perspective. But that marks a kind of a transition. So let's take a break, about 5 minutes, 10 minutes, okay? Then we'll reconvene, okay?
Welcome to use the restroom or grab some fresh coffee in the lobby. We'll resume again at 2 o'clock. Thank you. If you want to start making your way back to your seats, we'll get started here in just a couple more minutes. Thank you.
All right, are we almost, looks like maybe a few people. We'll wait just a second here. Yeah, we'll have at least 10 minutes or so here in a few minutes for questions, and so we can have some discussion here. All right. All right, let's pick up here, and one or two other things about how we got to this point, and then I want to transition into kind of where we stand today. And then next week, we'll take a look at the article that was distributed. I appreciate that being distributed, and we'll cover that next time. The one by Tim Judah. One of the reasons I think for the invasion was that Putin had come to believe that the U.S. and NATO simply would not stop him. There would be no real counter threat to stop his invasion. For a couple of reasons. In 2014, when he went into Crimea, we imposed sanctions, financial sanctions, but those were easily gotten around. There was no strong military force, a language that he understands, could put it that way. And then in 2019, the situation of withholding aid to Ukraine over Trump's desire that they open an investigation into Hunter and Burisma and recalling of a long-term diplomat. So Putin's feeling essentially was, these interests in these parts of the world, America kind of has attention deficit disorder, and for the moment it may be a flashpoint, but they're really not going to put a force in the area to stop us. That's more recent. In the 1990s, something else happens that could have changed the calculus in Ukraine. And that is, if you remember 1994, the Budapest Memorandum, when 3 former Soviet republics gave up their nuclear weapons, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, and Belarus. And, remember the context, non-proliferation, that's important. It was an important goal. But we look back now and think, if those nuclear weapons could have been kept in Ukraine as a deterrent, looking ahead and thinking, all right, Russia at this point may not be invading, but you never know what's going to happen in the future. Let's keep these nuclear weapons here. Could that have made a difference? Yes, I think it could have. So from Ukraine's point of view, and that's the point of this video, I don't know that I'll take the time at the moment. I might begin with that next time. We've got a little bit more time. It's 3 Ukrainian perspectives on what they believe the mistakes of the West happened to be in relating to Putin over the last 20 years or so, and why they find themselves, from a Ukrainian perspective, why they find themselves in the situation that they're in. Basically, it's Russia always comes first. It's a defer to Russia, deference to Russia, their interests, rather than the countries in the region. I think there may be something to that. Let me move on here. Another thing is a kind of club that boosted Putin's view that he had some support for something like this. It's geopolitics, but it's also domestic politics. So in the authoritarian club, the autocratic club that's growing, it's growing, this club is growing around the world. I've got a few members of the club. There are others we could include here. Simply on his side, saying that we need to build not just not a democratic future, but an autocratic one. And democracy in Ukraine threatens us, our interests, us being members of this club. This is a U.S. issue as well. And the thing that concerns me as much as anything is not just that there are these members in this kind of a club. That's a concern, the growing autocratic, authoritarian movement, but that they are so popular. They are so widely, broadly supported by the populations, by the voting franchise in these countries. That's a tougher nut to crack. That's, but I think that was a boost to his ambitions. Okay, which is why, in his opinion, and we'll come back to this next time, the election in 2024 here is such a big deal for what's going on in Ukraine, this part of Europe. All right, so let's talk a little bit about where we stand, and that'll give us a few minutes to talk about some of these things. Let me offer a couple of really good sources I keep coming back to that that are good sources of information. The Institute for the Study of War, I mentioned that. I don't know that I'll take the time to actually go to the sites. You can just type that in. And what it gives you is a daily update in a narrative form and in map form. So you can actually see the battle lines and how they're moving, how they're changing. But then it also gives you a nice narrative of political developments, technology, other aspects of the problem that are important. Okay, Institute for the Study of War, or ISW. A new site, Meduza, MEDUZA, Russian run, somehow able to make its way through Lithuania and then out onto the web, is a homegrown objective. It's not state. In fact, if it's anything, it's anti-Kremlin. Independent journalistic program operation that comments on its global affairs, but it's focused on the region. Very good, very well done, nicely produced. Just as long as you type in MEDUZA, that's the. So two good sources of information. By the way, the public reporting, I don't know, I'll get your opinion here in just a second. I'd like that to be one of the things I hear from you about how you think the public reporting is about this conflict in the major newspapers or the Atlantic or other publications. It's been, I think, it's been helpful. All right, so where do we stand on the ground? What I've got in the next few slides here is where we stand in different aspects. So on the ground, at sea, in the air, with nukes, with aid, and then we'll save that for next time, I think, the things to watch. So where do we stand on the ground? These are a couple of maps from the ISW site, and they're from the 9th, which was, what, a couple of days ago. And it's essentially depicting, documenting the Ukrainian counteroffensive operations that have made some progress, slow. It's definitely slow, but some progress in near Bakhmut, which is in eastern Ukraine, next to those two territories that were gobbled up. And then there was a referendum that was held just to give it a fig leaf of legitimacy. But it's in that part of Ukraine. According to Secretary of State Blinken, about 50% of the territory that Russia took initially has been retaken by Ukrainian forces. That's significant. In a David and Goliath story, that really is significant. Now, I say David and Goliath until we actually get to the ground, what's the operations on the ground, and then the technology and the actual tactics and battle strategy favors and the home turf advantage, if we can call it an advantage, I guess, favor the Ukrainians. But this is the way that this is the kind of thing I want to illustrate the site as much as just indicate that there has been some advance here. What about at sea? Well, this Black Sea fleet is the pride of the Russian forces, the Russian Navy. It's taken some hits. It's taken some significant hits. Drones, missiles, significant strikes on Russia's Black Sea fleet. Even claims that one of its leading commanders was killed in a recent campaign. The Kremlin has put out video that he's alive and well, but there are doubts on whether the video is authentic. But this has been a surprise, I think, to the powers in the region. How about in the air? Where do we stand in the air battle? Well, Zelensky just announced a day or two ago that Romania will be the F-16, the U.S. F-16 jet training ground for Ukrainian pilots. That's huge. That's really a big development. Not only because of how it could tilt the momentum, but that now Romania and Moldova and is also now part of a defense network. Okay. So that's just announced. The training and development of the F-16 part of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. What about nukes? Because there's this largest nuclear plant in Europe, Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, is now in cold shutdown. I don't know the technology exactly. It's a cold storage shutdown or cold shutdown anyway. But it's still the largest nuclear plant in Europe, so its fate its destiny is important. The Russian government now is moving toward revoking Russia's ratification of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. Now, what does this mean exactly? We'll see in time. But it raises the specter, at least, that formally, once these formal pullouts are done, are completed, then there is the sort of license then to begin to pull these weapons into the mix. And hopefully that will not be the case, but that's part of where we stand. What about with aid? The question of aid. And this came up recently in the House settlement of the funding package, the temporary funding package, and the Ukraine aid was left out of that. Here is one chart from Statista, and then there's a link here I want to go to show a few others. This is a graph of the countries committing the most aid to Ukraine from January 2022 to July of this year. So it's not completely up to date, but it's as of July. The EU in total, collectively, and this is in billion euros, then the US, Germany, Great Britain, and so on. There are any number of things we could take a look here. We know the US commitment has been significant. Germany's commitment. This was a big step for Germany in its post-World War II military posture to invest and commit actual weapons group to the conflict. And it's this chart divides it up. It shows the financial aid, strictly financial, humanitarian aid, and then the military aid. And in Germany's case, the military aid is as much as the other two. The other charts come from the Council on Foreign Relations. And let's see if I can pull this up. And it focuses on the U.S. aid, putting U.S. aid in perspective. So how much aid has the U.S. sent Ukraine in 6 charts? This was done as of September 23, just about, what's that, 3 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago. All right, so the first chart here, let me see if I can. Ukraine, aid to Ukraine towers over other recipients of U.S. aid compared to Israel, Jordan, Afghanistan, and so on. All right, now looking at this, people have said, well, these other countries weren't at war when this was done, so Ukraine being at war and them not being at war sort of skews the graph a little bit. This is going to change with Israel now involved in its war against Hamas. And by the way, just as a footnote, can you, what would Russia's reaction be to a war, ongoing, extended, prolonged, protracted war between Israel and Hamas? Yeah. Okay, because, okay, and okay, yeah.
The news people will concentrate on that, and then he'll be able to just continue slaughtering.
Okay, 2 reasons at least: higher oil prices and shift of our attention away from Ukraine to Israel, which he knows, Kremlin knows quite well that this is often our very intense focus. But in any case, back to the chart. That is one way to look at this, one perspective. The second, how U.S. aid to Ukraine compares historically to other moments. So this is Ukraine in 2022. It's the percentage is the share of our gross domestic product, and it combines military, financial, and humanitarian aid. So 0.33%, which is still in the whole scheme of things, doesn't seem like that much. And then Israel in 1979, Latin America, Pakistan, and Taiwan at other moments. Okay. How aid to Ukraine compares with other U.S. spending in the last few years. So the U.S. military budget right on top at $801 billion. The total for 2021 U.S. military budget total. All right. The TARP bailout. Some things that don't look really related to U.S. national security, but still just for spending comparisons. Interest on the federal debt. I don't know how state of Virginia budget gets in there, but and aid to Ukraine. And the argument made, it's significant, the amount is significant, but the argument for those arguing on behalf of aid to Ukraine for it, supporting it, say that it's really pennies on the dollar for what could be a much, much wider, more destructive conflict that, after all, is really democracy versus autocracy, if we want to put it in political terms. These are the countries that have provided aid to Ukraine. That is a little harder to read just in terms of U.S. aid to Ukraine far out exceeds those of other countries, except for the EU. And again, that's broken into military, financial, and humanitarian aid. Okay. And in the share of GDP, we want to look at it from that perspective. And I think that might be it. I think that's it's one way to put aid in some kind of context. It's a way to put it didn't really get into the numbers of troops. I think that oh, you know what? I think that comes out in. Let me go back to this real quick. I think there was a chart. Might have missed it. I think I did. Yeah. It actually, there was a chart somewhere in the mix that I don't think I put up about the exact list of weapons and weapon systems that we've given as aid. Anyway, that's a really quick look at where we stand in different aspects, different ways of looking at it. All right, and then here we're on to the things to watch, and we can develop these more next time because I want to leave some time for your thoughts and comments and questions. How do you see this, either the conflict more generally or specific aspects of it that strike you, that concern you? What do you think? Yeah, the mics will be coming around. Yes.
This isn't in response to the last question you asked, but the video of Putin, I think it was 2007.
Right.
I'm pretty sure I saw John McCain in a front row seat at that conference. I find that very interesting. I don't know what his position was in 2007, but I believe he went on to become one of Putin's most outspoken critics in the
He
U.S.
was.
Congress, and also one of the strongest supporters for Ukraine.
Yes, you're exactly right. This is a general security conference, so you're going to have people across the administration. This would have been 2007, so it would have been at the end of the Bush administration, and I've forgotten too exactly. He may have been on the Foreign Affairs Committee and had represented the U.S. in that capacity. But there were critics and there were supporters, so that room was charged as he was speaking. Yeah. Okay.
One thing I've often wondered about is, since Putin only really understands power, what would have happened at the beginning of the war if we had told him, we will give the Ukraine every weapon that you use against them? Would he have backed down?
I don't know. It's a great question. I think one of the criticisms of from Ukraine is that it's been very gradual and very slow and like pulling teeth at times to get everything that we need to fight the fight that we have. Surely it would have made some difference. I don't know, exactly what it would have, how things would have been different, but surely they would have been different.
Airports.
That's right. That was what they were asking for right away. That's why the F-16, I mean, here we're October of 23, it starts in February of 22. If that would have happened right away, that would have made a big difference. Yeah, that's one specific area that would have definitely made a difference. Yeah, other things, other thoughts about this? Foreign affairs, domestic affairs, how it affects, yeah.
It occurs to me that there's talk that China, Iran, and Russia are three of the same kind of ilk politically.
Yeah, right.
And it would not surprise me, given the timing of the attack by Hamas on Israel, backed by Iran, that Putin might not have suggested that now might be a good time to go in there.
I don't doubt that. I keep looking for reporting that there were some, back channel connections. We know the relationship between Russia and Iran. We know the relationship. We can piece the segments. We know Russia and Iran. We know Iran and at least Hezbollah, and Hamas is in there in the mix. Could it have been that the word got out, or they knew that without him even saying that the time was right for this? I don't doubt that that's the case. I have no evidence of it. If anyone has come across something, I'm happy to, but I think you're right to suggest that this is to me the bigger issue is what kind of a world really is emerging that we're talking about. This is kind of a case study that we're talking about, which is fascinating and important, but there's a bigger frame here, isn't there? There's a bigger story of the kind of global world that's emerging. So I think someone at the back, maybe.
This question is from online. Do you consider the loss of Crimea under the Obama presidency was a disaster in hindsight?
I do. I do. I think that was a moment that we could have made a stand, and who knows what might have how things would have been different. But I do. I think it was a loss to. Now there was this referendum, and there were Russians who wanted to join the Russian Federation in Crimea because there is a sizable Russian population, and those that did not. But the point is, for the region, for Ukraine, they needed help, and I don't think it came when it was needed. Yeah.
Wasn't opposition to Obama's desire to help Ukraine the reason why Mitch McConnell got the moniker Moscow Mitch?
Yes, I think that is. Yes, I think that one of the interesting things domestically, by the way, I wanted to thank those that are joining us online. I didn't do that at the beginning, and I apologize for that, because you're in the mix here with us, with the rest of us. Yes, and I think that one of the curious things that observers have noticed is within the Republican Party, the bromance, the interest, the attachment to Russia and to Putin in particular. Why? This is a long-term thing for decades in the Cold War. You guys know this better than I do. The Republican Party was the staunch anti-Soviet Democratic Party. That's changed. So what is behind that change? Now China is apparently our greatest enemy, and there's reason for the rivalry and competition. But why that change? Behind that, there's a lot of post-communist world stuff going on. So, yes.
What about the Russian Orthodox Church? It's got deep roots in both countries, right? Ukraine.
It does, and that's.
Are they on the same page, or
They are. In fact, that's why I included this photo of at the bottom. Patriarch Kirill has made this let's say, given his blessing to this, and argued that incorporating Ukraine back into the Russian Orthodox religious fold reflects history and the sort of a better look, a better view of the Orthodox community. That is not the way Ukrainian Orthodox believers feel. So in other words, the patriarch is taking the imperial line, which is historically is not unusual, but in this case, it is really discordant with Orthodox popular opinion.
whereas the Pope in Rome, he has got to be on the others. Well, not even. What
Where
I'm
is
trying
he?
to get at is the church, Orthodox Church in Ukraine, is that supporting?
It's split. There is an independent Orthodox church in Ukraine that is Ukrainian led. It's an autocephalous leadership, and clearly they are pro-Ukrainian, anti-Russian. But there are also Orthodox churches in Ukraine that are in the Moscow jurisdiction, patriarchate, denomination, so to speak, and they are supportive of the war. And there are stories coming out of individual priests who are on one side or the other that are, making stands of different sorts. I mean, we could get into the specific stories. What you're pointing to, it's important, is how this has divided religious communities in Europe and in the region, Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant. So this is, and we can pick up on this more next time if you want to develop that.
What does that? I talked to a lady from Crimea.
Mm-hmm.
She been here maybe 5 or 10 years, her mother wants to stay in Russia.
Uh-huh.
The dad wants to come here. She's
Yes.
living here.
Yes.
And she says, one side of the church says one thing, another says, I just left the church, basically.
Okay.
I just left the church because
I think what you're pointing to actually is something that comes out in the article we're going to be looking at next week, when it talks about how that it's fragmenting couples and families and kids, and then by implication, religious communities as well. And keep in mind that as I was saying, that this is reflective of a broader trend that, if we go back, well, I've got the slide up actually, how that this authoritarian movement is actually splitting and fragmenting not just political parties, but it's splitting churches here in the US and families who can't speak to each other about politics and whatnot. So this is beyond the headlines, below the headlines, however you want to express it, this is really reaching into our personal lives. So, but as it should in a sense, because it's a time to a gut check time to take a stand for I think for a more democratic future, but it's going to mean a fight, and hopefully not a violent one.
We have time for one more question, Scott. Beverly,
Okay.
Beverly, if you want
to. The Italian prime minister that was elected last, Leone, I think is her name, who is right leaning, way to the right, and more in the fascist Italian tradition. I think it's fair to say. In these parts of Europe, even in NATO countries, the concern that even in Slovakia, there was a recent election where a right-wing candidate was elected. In Poland, there's been some hesitancy, even though they've been taking in a lot of the refugees in terms of official support, military support, financial support. There's been some serious debates in Poland about whether this will continue. So, yeah.
please wait for the mic. Please wait for the mic. Thank you.
Okay.
Poland has a big election, October 15th, and I have friends there that are very, very worried.
Yeah. I think there's good reason to be.
Yeah.
And these are, we think, all right, they're in NATO, so they're safe allies. Well, maybe not. Let's hope that's the case. But in other words, one way for Putin to pick off even NATO countries is to influence the politics in some way. I think that's.
Thank you, Scott.
Okay, sure.
If you have additional questions.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I
If,
look forward
if you
to
have additional questions, please bring them to next week's session where Scott will be back. In the article he referenced, The New Ukraine, will have copies available for those of you who don't have internet access or computer access. To everyone else and to those listening at home, that will be emailed to you today. You'll be able to access that virtually. Okay, so the article that was referenced today will be in your inbox when you get home, or if you prefer a printed copy, there out in the lobby for you as you leave today. Thank you again, Scott. We'll see you next week. Thank you, everybody. See you next week.